title of our book is Globetrotter, How Abe Saperstein Shook Up the World of Sports by Matthew and Mark Jacob. Quick note about the authors. Mark Jacob is former Metro editor of the Chicago Tribune and former Sunday editor of the Chicago Sun-Times. He's the co-author of 10 books, mostly about history. He's also the former website editor of Northwestern University's Local News Initiative, and he was a member of the Illinois governor-appointed Local Journalism Task Force. Mark's brother Matthew Jacob is a public health consultant who has authored more than 10 peer-reviewed journal articles about health communication or policy. Matthew and Mark are authors known for their collaborative works that blend rigorous research along with engaging storytelling. With a shared passion for history, politics, and culture, the Jacob brothers have authored several acclaimed books that make complex subjects accessible and compelling to a wide audience. So, and quick note about our moderator today, Joe Yasharoff, I hope I have that right, is a longtime sports executive in Washington, D.C., formerly the news director at Montgomery Community Media. He was formerly the managing director at NBC Sports Washington and executive sports director at Fox 5 D.C. He has won 12 Emmy Awards, 12. And it was inducted into the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Silver Circle in 2014. So please welcome our guests and take it away. So.
Thank you. But I've never written a book, and I've always wanted to, so I think this is going to inspire me to write a book reading yours. So here's an important question. Whose name goes first, Mark or Matthew? Is that alphabetical, or was there a fight over...
I'm sorry, Matt's getting his mic here.
That's okay. So I wanted to know a really important prying question. Mark or Matthew, whose name goes... I see Mark first, then Matthew. Is that alphabetical, or was there a fight or a discussion about that?
Well, actually, it worked this way. I think I wrote more chapters, but I'm the oldest of us, okay. And so I'm the senior writer. I wrote more chapters, but he got all the hard ones. I mean, as the older brother... I assigned him to write all the difficult chapters that had original research that nobody knew before.
Matthew, you agree with that?
Mostly. No, actually, it's very true. The other piece of that puzzle is we wrote a book together in 2010, and Mark said, why don't you be listed as the first author? So I felt like this kind of, was a nice bit of settling the score a little.
Okay, we got that out of the way. So I really enjoyed this book. So the Globetrotters, for me personally, were my first team, my first real exposure to sports. I watch all their games on ABC in a wide world of sports. I watched the cartoon show in the morning. I had the baseball cards. I mean, they were sports to me. I mean, obviously it is a sport, but I'm sure, were they for you, or do you talk to a lot of people that the Globetrotters were a big part of their lives as kids?
Well, almost everyone's got a story about the Globetrotters. Yeah. When we've done book appearances, people invariably come up to us and say, I went with my uncle one time and it was the best time I ever had with him, or they just remember things. It's like this thing that becomes embedded in people's memories. And that's part of the significance of the Globetrotters, is that they were just so much not just a sports team, but just a fun element in society and a thing that families did together. That was part of what Abe Saperstein was all about. He was very fan-oriented, and he had incredibly elaborate halftime shows at his basketball games. He was trying to appeal to people who were not just sports fans, who just were there for fun. And so he was such an advocate for the fan, and frankly, Matt, I think you'd agree that put him on the outs with a lot of traditional sports people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I have a work colleague who I mentioned I was writing this book, and she said to me, oh, the Globetrotters, gosh, my grandfather took me to see them in Sioux Falls, South Dakota when I was a little girl, and she made the point that there wasn't much professional sports to be found anywhere within a reasonable sphere of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So for her, it was a special opportunity. And in the early years, Mark and I write about this in the book. In the early years, the Midwest and that Farm Belt region, that was really the backyard of the team. The Globetrotters really concentrated and made their name in that part of the country.
So, Mark, you touched on this. So the Globetrotters were a basketball team. It's sports, but it's really the book, and again, you touch on it, culture, racism, race relations. That's a huge part of them and this book, correct?
Yeah, it's important to understand this book there's a lot of fun in this book, a lot of anecdotes, but it's also really serious in some parts. I mean, it deals with American culture, racism, even foreign policy. I mean, Matt did research at the National Archives about how the State Department was pushing the Globetrotters to improve their image in the Cold War.
Yeah, no, it was you know, you look at Abe Saperstein and you look at the team and the impact they had, and Saperstein in particular had a tremendous impact not only in basketball and desegregating that sport, but desegregating baseball. We can talk a little more in depth about the baseball piece of it, but you know, this book is really, it's about sports, but also, as Mark said, it's about race and race relations. It's about a little bit of foreign policy.
Right.
And it's also about a man who was absolutely undaunted, who was determined not to fail. And I mean, he stumbled a few times here and there, but this was the classic immigrant story America loves, of somebody who was absolutely persistent to the end.
So another thing this book is, well, one thing this book is not all it's not all a glowing portrait of Abe Saperstein. This is showing the whole man, and like most people, like all people in the world, he was very complicated. If you could talk a little about that.
Well, he was kind of a hype master. I mean, he would claim to have the best team in the world when he didn't at all. But the thing about him is that he was kind of a fake it till you make it guy.
Yeah.
To where he was constantly he was exaggerating the exploits of his team, but ultimately, as we show in the book, he had the best professional basketball team in the world. I mean, he beat the best team in '48, the Minneapolis Lakers, and which was, you know, considered by everyone, it was an all-white team, considered to have the best team in the world, and the Globetrotters beat him, and that was significant because that told people that black players could compete with white players. And 2 years later, the NBA desegregates. And, you know, a lot of sports historians think it wouldn't have happened without Abe Saperstein making the Harlem Globetrotters what they were.
Is he in the Hall of Fame, and if not, should he be?
He is, yeah. He was elected posthumously, and a bevy of Globetrotters are there as well, which I think, again, you know, if those of you who have seen the Globetrotters on TV or in person in, say, the last 10 or 15 years, where I would say the comic elements of their game have been played up much more, it's easy not to fully appreciate the athleticism that was there with the team. Certainly there was a lot of clowning, a lot of antics, but those players are in there not just because they were kind of splashy and fun, but there was really tremendous athletic talent on that team, whether you're talking Marcus Haynes or Goose Tatum and others.
Well, you know, and Saperstein benefited from the fact that so many of the white teams were racist and would not allow black players, so where he really had the pick of the best black basketball players in the country. And so that was why it was such a great team.
And Haynes is still considered to this day one of the greatest ball handlers of all time. And
he dribbled out the fourth quarter of a basketball game one time.
The entire fourth quarter.
He dribbled out they were ahead. There was no shot clock back then, and he spent the entire fourth quarter dribbling all around and never lost the ball. I mean, which is insane, but it happened.
Yeah.
It happened in Mexico City on a tour.
Wow. And I remember guys like Meadowlark Lemon, Curly Neal. You said Goose Tatum. There was Herbert Geese Osby, I believe.
Yeah.
Some of these great names. And again, they're kind of known as clowns of basketball, but they were all great players in their own right.
Yeah, I mean, Goose Tatum is a good example of that. We mentioned baseball. Well, one of the hats that Saperstein wore in baseball was he was briefly, for 3 or 4 years, a co-owner of the Birmingham Black Barons team in the Negro American League. And Saperstein, while wearing that hat, he's going down to Birmingham. He's watching a baseball game, and he sees their first baseman, who happened to be Goose Tatum. He had not played in any organized baseball league, basketball league at that time, and he sees this guy who's 6'3½", pretty tall in the 1930s, and who has a wingspan of 84 inches when he spreads his arms out wide, and he thought this guy would be a natural basketball player, as long as, he's got the athleticism, he's got moves, he's got agility. The other thing he noticed, though, was he made the fans laugh. He would juggle the ball right after he caught it at first base, and he did all these antics, and he said, this is a perfect fit, right? He's got the athleticism, but he's got that comic element.
And I did the math. It's probably wrong, but 84 inches is 7 feet. And your wingspan is supposed to equal your height, and he was 6'3", but his wingspan was 7 feet. Did I get the math right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. That has never happened before. Some of the things that Saperstein created that I didn't know, a lot of people probably didn't know, or is credited with at least being one of the first. Let's start with West Coast expansion. I mean, that, was he one of the first?
Yeah, one of the things we want to emphasize is that Abe Saperstein is one of the most underappreciated people in the history of American sports.
Yeah.
And really underappreciated for a number of reasons. He pioneered the three-point shot in basketball. He, which, has transformed the game. You look at the NBA today, and the three-pointer matters a whole lot.
What decade are we talking about now?
Well, that was in the early 60s.
Okay.
I think some people... There's this feeling about people, and this is understandable, that they think that the rules are always the same. There's always been a three-point shot. And, until 1938, after every basket, they threw up, a jump ball at midcourt. The team that got scored on didn't take the ball out at the end of the court. They threw it up, which was really an advantage for tall players. But so that changed in '38, and they were constantly changing the rules. And Saperstein was always pushing for rule changes because he loved to talk about it. But you mentioned the West Coast thing, and that's an example of Abe as a visionary. And the more Matt and I were doing research on this book, the more we said we couldn't believe that a lot of what this guy was looking for in sports was not appreciated. Even today, people don't have any idea how important he was. He was pushing for West Coast expansion for basketball long before it happened because he'd been taking the Globetrotters on tour, and they'd clearly drawn the crowd. But until the 1960, there was not a team west of Minneapolis in the NBA, which was ridiculous. And so Saperstein was really pushing for that. He pushed for, what else, Matt? He pushed for variable ticket pricing.
Yeah. In the mid-1950s, he's saying, hey, it's crazy that, here in Cleveland, where I am, it's crazy that the St. Louis Browns come into play, and their tickets to see them play are the same price as tickets to see the New York Yankees play, who virtually every season are winning the pennant. So he said, teams should mix that up. The prices shouldn't just be the same. He was also an early exponent and proponent of night baseball.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize Negro leagues actually pioneered night baseball. MLB was a little skeptical about it. They finally dipped their toe in the water, but they moved very slowly. And in the late 1930s, Saperstein is saying, hey, not everybody can take off work to go to a ball game. So, this is something you should be playing more night baseball. So he really pushed the envelope in a lot of ways. And in the process, he did step on toes, and that may have been why the NBA did not give him a franchise when he wanted one.
Well, because he was constantly complaining about the NBA. He was really important to the success of the NBA. Everyone sees the NBA as a big, powerful and popular league today, but they were struggling. They were they went down from, I think, something like 18 to 9 teams in a period of a couple years in the early years. And they were really, and Saperstein would do double headers with them. So there would be a league game, and then there would be a Globetrotter game also. But the Globetrotters played first, and these were some of the best draws they had the whole year. Every NBA team could count on having a meal ticket when the Globetrotters would play with them, and it was vitally important to their financial success. So the Globetrotters would play these games, and then before the league game happened as the second game, half the fans would leave because they enjoyed the Globetrotters and not the other team. And so they eventually changed it to where the Globetrotter game came second. So that people wouldn't leave, and so they would watch the NBA game. That's how powerful the Globetrotters were. But as things went on, the Globetrotters did more and more comedy, and I think that the NBA felt like they were just not a serious team, and that to give Abe his own NBA team, which he wanted, would have hurt their credibility, because Saperstein was begging them to give him a Los Angeles franchise. And if you're wondering why the Los Angeles Lakers are called the Los Angeles Lakers, it's because the Minneapolis Lakers moved to Los Angeles. So a place that had plenty of water, the Lakers moved to a place that had no water, but still became called the Lakers. And that was, Abe viewed that as a stab in the back, because he'd been begging to have a franchise in Los Angeles. He'd earned it, but they didn't give it to him.
So the land of 10,000 lakes, and then LA's probably got 3 lakes. I've never understood that, and the Utah Jazz might be even worse.
Yes.
Not a lot of jazz as far as I know in Utah, but maybe I'm wrong. I had another one. Oh, so what you're describing about Abe is he was a disruptor, right? And did he enjoy that status as a disruptor?
Yeah, I think he did. I think he knew he was this edgy guy. It got him press. It got him a lot of ink on the sports pages, and he certainly liked that. He liked seeing himself as outside the mainstream. He was very close friends for many years with a person who, if people here who know baseball and baseball history, a gentleman named Bill Veeck.
Absolutely.
Bill Veeck grew up in a bedroom community of Chicago. Saperstein grew up on the north side of Chicago. They were both disruptors. They both, at one point, Veeck said, I don't believe in breaking the rules. I believe in bending them as far as they will possibly go. So, I mean, that's kind of their mentality was, all right, I'm going to see what I can do. But again, they both thought about the fans first and foremost.
And Matt, they both were kind of social justice warriors of their era, right? Because I mean, you talk about Veeck, the story about Veeck.
Yeah, when Veeck was down in Florida, he was a GM of a minor league team, and he was in a town in Florida. This was probably back around, probably early 40s, and he would often, even when he was with the Cleveland Indians, he would leave the big press box area and the nice little swanky suite, and he would wander around the stands and sit in different sections throughout the game. He wanted to overhear what were fans saying, what were they complaining about, were the hot dogs lukewarm, right? He wanted to hear it all. And so he was doing that in Florida. He wandered into the segregated black area of the stands, and a local security person said, Mr. Veeck, you've got to leave. You're white. You can't be here. And he said, oh, yes, I can. Then he actually calls the sheriff. The sheriff comes down and says, this is a black area only. You can't stay down here. And Veeck said, look, I'm not bringing my team back here ever again unless you leave me alone. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was.
And the two, Abe and Bill Veeck, conspired or came up with a plan to integrate baseball years before it actually happened.
Yeah. There was a plot in 1942 to buy the Phillies. Veeck would buy them. Saperstein would help him stack them with good players from the Negro Leagues. There were some initial doubts about it in the baseball historian world. I think most of the emerging evidence that we've seen over the past several years has provided added weight that there was at least some kind of scheme. How far they took it, we don't know. Why they abandoned it, we don't know. But their plan was in early 1943, take the Philadelphia Phillies out of spring training as an all-black team in the National League. I'm sure that would have caused some shockwaves.
And you were talking about Bill Veeck. So for those that don't know, Bill Veeck did a lot of creative things with baseball. One of them was, many of you know, Eddie Goodell was the midget. And how tall? He was about 3 foot something. Yeah. And who knows what number he wore? 1/8 was his number. And the strike zone, as you can imagine, was like this. So it was almost impossible to throw a strike to a midget. Yeah. So that's the kind of thinking.
As you know, the special counsel released his findings today.
We have in our crowd here
about
Bruce
their
Adams,
look into my handling of classified documents.
Trained baseball. He is I consider
I was pleased to see he reached the firm conclusion.
Some great promotion.
No charges.
Bruce, were you inspired by Bill Veeck and Abe Saperstein and some of the things that he did?
This was an exhaustive investigation going back more than 40 years, even into the 1970s when I was still a new United States Senator. The special counsel acknowledged I cooperated completely. I did not throw up any roadblocks. I sought no delays. In fact, I was so determined to give the special counsel what he needed, I went through the 5-hour in-person interview over 2 days on October the 8th and 9th of last year, even though Israel had just been attacked by Hamas on the 7th, and I was very occupied. I was in the middle of handling an international crisis.
And one of the things Saperstein
I was especially pleased to see special counsel make clear the stark distinction and difference between this case and Mr. Trump's case.
Southeast Wisconsin, which
Special counsel wrote, and I quote,
funding and just financially kind of stabilized his situation. But I think, quite honestly, they learned from each other a lot.
So, who were the main people that Saperstein learned from?
I think he learned from black ball players. I think, so just a real quick thing on how Abe got started. It's important to understand that the Harlem Globetrotters were not from Harlem, and they didn't start out as Globetrotters. That was totally something that Abe Saperstein made up because he wanted to send a signal that, hey, I'm bringing black ball players to your white town in the Midwest. So if I put Harlem in the name, you're going to know that. You're not going to be surprised. There's not going to be any unpleasantries. It's going to work out. And so that's why he called them the Harlem Globetrotters. They didn't play in Harlem until decades after they started. And so Abe was a 5'3" Jewish guy from the north side of Chicago. He loved sports and was good at sports, but he was 5'3". He wasn't going to play college ball. And he started out as a coach of baseball and basketball on the north side in the Chicago park system. And by doing that, he met these black ball players, former football stars, former baseball stars, touring, black athletes who had set up barnstorming tours where they would go to towns in the Midwest and they would play and they would earn a little money that way. And Abe got to know them, and so frankly, I'd say his biggest mentors
vintage.
were
At West
black
China Tea,
athletes.
it's not just about tradition,
The style that I'm doing it in is called Gong Fu Cha, which is this Chinese-style tea service.
but
You
the
took one of
entire
my questions,
community
Bruce, but
built
go ahead.
around tea.
Yeah.
Very special space. It creates what's called a third space.
After
I think
11
that's
long
a great
months of
point,
work,
and I don't know if everybody here knows what Savannah
owner
Bananas, but
Sohan
they are
Fawn
a,
says they're
let's just say,
finally ready to
one-of-a-kind
open their new
baseball
location
team.
on East
And you
7th
just
Street
need to go on
downtown.
We're so excited.
your
I can't
browser and
overstate
just type
how
Savannah Bananas.
pivotal
Some of
this
the videos
particular
are
moment is.
It's
absolutely
been a
hilarious.
difficult year.
I think
Having
in
to
many ways,
tread water
if
while
Abe
we
Saperstein
get the
were
place
able to
open
see
has
that, he
impacted
would
us
be
a lot.
laughing,
First, they
falling
were
down
forced to
laughing.
leave their original
There are
location
a
off
whole lot of things in
I-35 due to the
sports like
highway
that
expansion.
that I
We were
think
in our
you would
old spot
appreciate.
for
Remember, the
about
NBA used to have an all-star
7
game.
years.
Then
That was
came
it.
a
They had
trade
their
war
all-star
with
game.
China.
Our team is all from China, and the teaware that we sell is mostly from China.
In the face of a 145% tariff on announced a 30% discount on
And in
tea.
baseball, it's not just an all-star game. They have a home run derby contest. That's the kind of stuff that people like Saperstein and Vec would say, this is what you need. Give fans something they can't get anywhere else. It's showtime, right?
Saperstein once had a truncated version of a Broadway show that performed at halftime. It was like 45 minutes between the halves of the Globetrotters. It was called Hell's a Poppin', if you've ever heard of that show. He just hired a Broadway show to travel with him, and so he had a phrase he called pulls, which was attractions, things other than the basketball game that would bring people in, and his view was
Tifa, martial
as I
artist, is
mentioned,
officially
he
here to fulfill all your
overpromised
extra
stuff all the
combat
time, but
dreams.
his
The way her trigger
goal
works
was
is that for each
to
opponent, you're able to deal
over-deliver
combat damage
at the
to
same
in your
time, to
first
where he
combat
would
phase of your
always
turn.
leave-
She generates
leave
another
fans
combat phase. So if you hit
surprised
all
by
3
what
opponents in your
happened
first one,
and
you
getting
get
more
3
than
extra
they
combats
expected
after
to
that.
get.
So here's the
Bruce,
10
don't
best
do
cards you
Broadway
haven't thought of
shows,
for
for
Tifa
your
martial
baseball
arts.
games, please,
Our first
okay.
card is Annie Joins Up. Both melee and the additional combats are triggered abilities, which means this card is supercharging her. Not to mention dealing 5 damage to a creature and potentially opening up an opponent for her to hit. And the super cool thing about melee is that those power buffs actually stack. She will keep adding power in each combat phase until the end of your turn. Then
Well,
we want
this was a
Anzrak the
great
Quake Mole.
conflict
This
in
guy says to your
Saperstein's
opponent,
career
block,
because
don't block,
the
I don't care.
regular
I'm swinging again.
hidebound
And we'll
people
definitely
in
be
the
swinging with cards like
NBA and in
Thin
Major
Clay
League
Fugitives.
Baseball,
The Encore
they
ability
thought it was
allows
a
these
pure
tokens to stay
sport,
until
and
the
they
end of
didn't
the
want any
turn,
fooling
not just the end of the
around.
combat phase.
And,
And
you know,
they'll actually be
Saperstein at the
declared as
same time is
attackers,
like
which triggers Tifa's
complaining that
melee,
the games
unlike
are too
Myriad.
slow.
Plus,
You know,
they
you've
already have
seen
some
in Major
evasion.
League
But for
Baseball,
creatures who
they've done a
don't,
pitch
we're
clock
playing
now.
Thunderfoot Bailoff and
This is
Pathbreaker
50 or 60
Pathbreaker's incredible
years
because
after
its
Abe
power boost is
Saperstein was
cumulative.
complaining
Every time it
about how
attacks,
slow
it is boosting
baseball
and
games
boosting
were.
and boosting.
So
while
he was
Thunderfoot
way ahead
Bailoff
of
has
his
the
time in
benefit of
being
not
an
needing
advocate
haste
for
to
the
apply its
fans.
ability the turn you cast it. Which brings me to Rhythm of the Wild. In a big fat creature deck like this,
And
granting your
football
threats like
stadiums too,
Pathbreaker
by the way.
Ibex haste
Clemson
is going
is-
to be
it's unbelievable
essential,
what
as
they're
well
doing.
protecting your board with cards like Kutsil,
Okay,
Malamet,
so,
Exemplar. This guide
what
is
did I wanna ask
everything
you?
you need,
Okay, so
from keeping your hand
when you
full while
write
you're
a
hitting
book,
each
I've never
opponent
written a
to
book.
protecting
I
you
think
from
you've
all your
written
opponent's
20
spells
or
when it's
more
time to go for the
between the two
win.
of
Our
you.
next ad is Teamer Battle Rage. It's
interested
a
in
little
the
win more to
subject,
try to
you
give
think
our
you know
whole
the
team double
subject.
strike, but at such an
What-
efficient
how-
rate,
what
using this
percentage
even on
did you
Tifa
learn
herself
after
could
you
make or break a
decided to
win
do
that
the book?
turn.
Did you
And last but
know
not least, we're running
90% of
Master
what's
War
in the
Craft
book?
and Taunt from the
Yeah, I
Ramparts.
think
What's better than
Mark and
trampling
I
over our opponent's creatures than not even letting them block at
Abe
all? Stay tuned for a
Saperstein
complete
founded the
deck
Harlem
upgrade.
Globetrotters basketball team.
Period.
At that point,
That's it.
Tifa
that was
Martial
about
Artist is
it.
officially
But
here
as-
to
before
fulfill
we
all your
really
extra
were all
combat
in on writing
dreams.
the
The way
book,
her
we
trigger
did a
works
little bit
is
of
that for each
exploring,
opponent, you're able to
this,
deal
that,
combat
and the
damage
other.
to in your
And, you know, we
first
would get
combat
back
phase
from
of
the
your turn.
library
She
for
generates
some
another
archives,
combat
and
phase. So if
Mark
you
would
hit all
text
three
me, "You won't
opponents in your
believe what I
first one,
found."
you
I
get
would
three
call-
extra
I would
combats
call
after
him and
that.
say,
So here's the
"You gotta
10
take a
best
look at
cards
this
you haven't thought of
document."
for
You know,
Tifa
we
Martial
really
Artists. Our
stumbled
first
on
card is
what we
Annie
felt
Joins
was a
Up.
wealth of
Both melee and the
information
additional combats
that
are triggered
demonstrates why
abilities.
he was so overlooked. So it was, I think, at the start, we knew this guy was famous because he founded one of the most famous basketball teams of the century. But beyond that, not much, right? I mean,
Right, and you know, the idea that he pioneered the three-point shot. He's really more responsible for the three-point shot in basketball than any other human being, and almost nobody knows that. And part of the goal of the book is to give him credit for that.
Yeah.
And we mentioned a little bit about the State Department stuff. The book has more information than has ever been revealed about how the U.S. State Department was working with Saperstein. They were like helping him financially. They gave him money. They also used embassies as, in effect, a currency exchange, to where the deal was that if you went over to some foreign countries, like especially in Eastern Europe, that you couldn't take any money you earned out of the country. You had to buy things and take those goods out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was a big hassle for Abe when he went to the Soviet Union, and that was in 1959, I think. He bought a bunch of postage stamps and sable furs, and he had to haul those out of the country, so he couldn't take any money out. Well, the State Department solved that problem for him by letting him take this foreign currency to the embassy in that country, in every country, and then they'd go back home, and the State Department would cut him a check. Well, that's highly unusual. That's like, in fact, I think it might have been a scandal if people had known it at the time. But they did that, and Matt found this correspondence from the State Department that had been declassified in recent years. That explain that.
Well, they were clearly trying to. Drew Pearson, for those who know kind of politics of the
Washington
40s,
merry-go-round.
50s, 60s, he had one of the most famous columns in politics and government. But he was a really big player too. He wasn't just writing about stuff. He would take goodwill tours and go to military bases overseas and appear with entertainment and introduce them, etc. So he was going on this tour to North Africa, trying to plan it with Saperstein and the Globetrotters, and you know, this correspondence every day or so. There's a new message about, well, will Saperstein do this if we do this? How can we find funding for this? Who's going to print the tickets? I mean, it was just this tremendous intrigue, and Pearson has told us he will announce that he is funding this. And so there was a lot of sleight of hand.
Yeah, there was some funny money going on where the State Department was probably under the table giving Saperstein money to do these things, and was helping promote it, print tickets, and so a lot of these details have never been published before. I mean, one of the things that I think we're proudest of in the book is that we really break new ground, because I got to interview various family members who told us stories that had never been told about the Globetrotters. Plus, we did a lot of fact checking, and the fact that you can get to newspaper archives now online that you never could get to before mean that we debunked a lot of myths about the Globetrotters. For example, the idea that Abe Saperstein pushed that, well, we were used to be a straight team and then slowly and surely we became a comedy act. Well, we found a news clip before they even started playing games in which they're advertising themselves and their comic antics. They use the term comic antics. So something that's been published in dozens of books, that the Globetrotters started out as a straight team, is not true, and we debunk it in the book. And so one thing I'm really proud of the fact, this is not in newspapers. There's a phrase called a clip job, which is when you read a bunch of different things, then you put it all together and you put a new spin on it. This book is not a clip job. This book has original information that's never been in books before, and we're really proud of that fact.
And your journalism background obviously came in handy.
Yeah, well, it sure did, as far as like getting the. See, with Saperstein, here he is. He's a white guy who's running around with black players, and they're laughing and they're being clowns on the basketball court. Well, that made him. He was promoting black talent, and he was also giving black people jobs, and including in his front office, he gave a lot of black people jobs. So he was considered kind of a real promoter of of equality at the time. But here come the 60s and the civil rights movement, and some people really hated the idea that the black image in America was clowns on a basketball court.
Right.
So Abe's image came crashing down in the 60s and even in the 70s after he died. And so the family was very hesitant to even get involved with it. We worked with his grandkids who had this treasure trove of information on him, but we had to gain their trust first. And slowly but surely, by telling them the truth and being honest with them that we were writing a warts and all biography that would say the good things and the bad things, we got them to trust us. And so they gave us new information, including a memoir that Abe's daughter wrote that had never been published that we used in the book. And so there's just a ton of original information in the book.
So when I think of the Globetrotters, maybe one of the first things I think about is their theme song, which wasn't an original song, but they repurposed it. Sweet Georgia Brown, I think you all know it, but let's listen to a few seconds. Awesome.
Hey man, who's that cat coming down the street?
I don't know, but it sounds to me like that gifted man with the bone.
Sure having himself a ball.
Love that song, and they're hand in hand, the song and the Globetrotters. How important, we talked about the entertainment aspect, having their own theme song, and when I hear the song, I think of the circle where they're thrown behind the back.
They call that the magic circle.
Yeah.
And when the song came out 20 years before the Globetrotters even embraced it.
And wasn't it more of a ballad when it first came out, kind of slower paced and stuff? Yeah.
Well, it was written, and the thing about it is that I always loved is that we did research into the song, and we found out that it was co-written by a black man and a Jewish man. And so it was perfect as kind of this black-Jewish coalition to do something. And but the funny thing about this, and there's so much mythology about the Globetrotters, is that there are about 5 or 6 different stories about how they embraced that song. One story is that one guy who worked with the Globetrotters heard it in a Canadian department store and loved it. And there's just a lot of different stories. And we've actually found records. We went to the University of Texas, which has all the Globetrotter records, and they have, even in the archives, they have 2 different versions of how that song became their theme. But eventually it did, and it was just, it just seemed perfect for them. And they made money off of that song. They actually toured with a group called Brother Bones, who did that version of the song. And they, and we found a news clip that said that they sold 500 copies of that record at one Globetrotter game.
Wow.
So it was immediately embraced. If you go to the Globetrotters game now, which we do, they're still playing it.
How much have the Globetrotters changed since they began?
I think that the Globetrotters GM, the general manager in the front office, has recognized that the world has changed dramatically, that there's not really much sense in trying to compete on a more athletic level with NBA teams to present yourself in that frame. And so it is a much more distinctly entertainment venue. And I'd say it's much more aimed at kids and teenagers today. That game we went to in Austin, Texas, I mean, it was really great. They encouraged kids come out of out of the stands onto the court, probably even more than the Globetrotters were doing in the 60s or 70s. So a much more kind of kid-centered audience, and that seems to make sense given where the market is and how things have changed.
Are you surprised, Bruce brought up the Savannah Bananas, are you surprised that it took that long for somebody to borrow that model to do what they've done, which is genius?
Kind of, yeah. No, it's. I mean, you got to really go online and look at this. I mean, they filled one of the largest college football stadiums in the country, like a month or so ago. And I mean, it's. They really have just gotten a groundswell. But I'm a little surprised, that it took that long. But there's a market there. The Globetrotters proved it, and the Savannah Bananas have kind of reinforced it.
The funny thing about that is, I felt like the Globetrotters act. I mean, they were doing Showtime before there was Showtime, but then now the NBA, they did Showtime with Magic Johnson and everything, and they're still, the NBA is extremely showy right now, and I just wondered whether that had taken the shine off the Globetrotters act to where it was really kind of. The circus isn't as popular as it used to be. Right. And I wondered whether the Globetrotters were really kind of starting to lose it. But I took my twin grandsons to a recent Globetrotter game. They're 12-year-old kids. They've seen a lot. They're sophisticated. They loved it. They thought it was hilarious, really? and they had a great time. And that told me that there's this kind of connection between generations, and that the Globetrotters have a chance to keep on going. They're almost to their 100th anniversary.
Yeah. All right, we're going to open to questions in a minute. I think one of you touched on halftime shows. That was one of the other things that Abe was way ahead of everybody. So can you talk about some of the halftime? Well, you mentioned Broadway. Right. But I don't know if that was a halftime show.
Yeah, it was. But they also did they did table tennis. They did juggling. They did what they called hand balancing. Where you two people. Mm-hmm. They did lots of just crazy stuff. They actually, one of the things, most interesting halftime acts they did was they had Althea Gibson, the famous black tennis star. They had her play a tennis game before the game. I don't think this was a halftime. They had that happen before the game, and she got paid more for that than for anything else she did.
Bruce is taking notes. All right, we're going to get to you. I have one other. Maybe the two most famous Globetrotters, arguably, Wilt Chamberlain and Bob Gibson. I don't know if everybody knows that those two played for the Globetrotters. Were they legit, or were they just there because of their names? No, I mean, obviously Wilt's legit, but...
Yeah, there were some eligibility issues with Chamberlain, and so I think there was, Mark, you probably know this a little more forwards and backwards, but there was a lag time where he couldn't go right into the pro draft right away.
Wilt from Kansas?
Wilt Chamberlain, coming out of the University of Kansas. And he ends up signing with the Globetrotters and loves it. But he did eventually go to the NBA, was signed by Philadelphia. Although he would still play for summers thereafter, several summers, he toured with the Globetrotters in Europe. He really loved the experience. And
can you imagine an NBA team today letting one of their players risk injury by traveling to the?
Yeah, pretty incredible.
Never. It would never be. It'd be banned in the contract, probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Bob Gibson was. He was a great player at Creighton.
Right.
And
two-way player, right? Baseball and basketball.
And the Globetrotters, one of the most things that really made them so famous in the United States is they would go on tours in which they played college all-star teams. And that's how they ran into Bob Gibson, because he was on the college all-star team and really impressed them. And so he played with the Globetrotters for a short period of time, but the St. Louis Cardinals eventually said you got to pick a sport. We want you to concentrate on baseball, and I think he turned out to be a pretty decent baseball player.
He did.
ERA
of 1.12 in 1968, I believe, before they raised the mound. Yes, sir.
So can I ask the first question? So where did all the players come from, or still coming from? Were they black college players, or?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because in the early years, Saperstein was promoting the fact that he would often in their press materials and press releases say we have recruited the best black collegians from across the country. I mean he pretty much said, or at least implied, right, that his players were from college programs, and they weren't. I think he did that partly to add some panache, partly to make them seem more high class, dealing with a racist kind of world in which, well, what kind of black men are you bringing to our town? That kind of attitude, and maybe that's some way he was trying to address that. But they were not not from colleges for the most part, right?
Yeah, for the most part,
where did he get them?
Well, he got them from
high schools.
Yeah, from great high schools in Chicago, especially. Yeah. I mean, that's where they started. And
Wendell Phillips High School in Chicago was what was really a backbone.
Yeah, and Detroit also. Detroit had some great, pro players who joined the Globetrotters as well. But in later years, now today, it's pretty much college players who love playing the game are not good enough to get drafted, and also. The Globetrotters try them out, and they have to have entertainment value. They have to have the right. The thing about it is they're a goodwill team. I mean, their job is to make people laugh and to make people smile, and they really, as Matt mentioned, they love kids and they deal with kids well, and and after the game they'll sit for autographs, and being a nice person actually is a qualification for being a Globetrotter.
I'd like to know how a Jewish guy ended up being an advocate for black basketball players. What was the significance of it, particularly in that era? And surely there were some tensions that came from that as well.
Yeah. Well, I think as Mark described, it was somewhat happenstance. This is a guy who had a job through the Chicago park system and came face to face, very much interacting with these players, many of them white, but many of them black, and he got along with them. They clicked. I mean, I think that there was a comfort level that most people didn't have, and that may not seem like a big deal today, to think in the late 1920s that a Jewish guy from the North Side was clicking and getting along and building relationships with black men. Keep in mind, one of the worst race riots in this country's history was the 1919 Chicago race riot. So, I mean, this was like, 7, 8, 9 years later, he's building relationships with people who trust him, and they eventually say, hey, we'd like to form a team and maybe, travel around the Midwest. But I think that, I think at heart, Saperstein, didn't have a preachy tone when he talked about the issue of race and racism. He viewed it as just simply dumb. That's probably a word he would use. It's dumb that we worry whether somebody's white or black. We want the best players. We want the best talent. Why would that matter? Why should it matter? And I think that was a little more, he never would have said, well, I consider myself deeply concerned about social justice. He was a pretty no-nonsense guy. Right. Fans deserve to see the best players, the best teams, whether they're white, black, yellow, gray, whatever. And that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, and he decided he was going to prove that racism was stupid and wrong, instead of trying to preach to people about that. And frankly, as we explained in the book, that view was a little out of fashion in the 1960s. I mean, it was a more confrontational issue. There was this endemic racism, especially in the Jim Crow laws, and a lot of people thought we couldn't tolerate it anymore. Abe, just a couple years before he died, gave this amazing interview, which frankly, we haven't seen in any book. We found it in an obscure newspaper in our newspapers.com archive search, and in that interview he explains that he's going to prove to racists that it's wrong, just by showing that his players have class, that they're positive, that they're talented, and I just think he was going to try to prove against racism in an era where people had kind of given up on that as this kind of accommodationist gradual thing. Another thing about Saperstein I want to say is that he came from a Jewish family that moved to the north side of Chicago in the Ravenswood neighborhood, which had almost no Jewish people at all. They were maybe the only Jewish family in that neighborhood. In fact, Abe played second base for the Roman Catholic school team. And so he so he got along with people of all races, creeds, colors. He just cut through that crap. And I think that's one of the things that's most inspirational about his story. Not a perfect guy. I mean, actually, we found some quotes that you would say, a little kind of quasi-racist, kind of a creature of the time. He was a creature of the time. But overall, he was really kind of trying to cut through this kind of narrow-minded, racist view of things.
This gentleman.
Hi there. I've been privileged to read the book. It's a great book, by the way. One thing I was struck by was he didn't just have one team. He had maybe 4 or 5 instances running, and so maybe another innovation he had was running multiple instances, and didn't he sort of essentially franchise the booking rights to people in different parts of the country? So wasn't there innovation there too?
Well, I know there was one point, Mark, where they had a team in South America. They had another Globetrotter squad in Europe, and they had one playing domestically in Wichita, Kansas. So as far as franchising, I'm trying to remember.
I actually don't know that he franchised out. I think he was trying to make the money himself.
Not formally franchising, but didn't he have someone he worked with in Washington State looking out there?
Well, yeah, he had friends all over, and he would hire. You know what he would do is he would hire advance men. He actually stole this idea from P.T. Barnum, who would have advance men who traveled the tour 2 weeks ahead of time, and chatted up the sports writers and made sure that all the preparations for the game were right. So he had agents in effect all over the country and the world, and he was this brilliant guy as far as making friends all over the place, especially sports writers. Now, I used to be an editor at a big newspaper, and I was really kind of offended that Abe would send boxes of apples to sports writers. He would even buy them watches and give them watches. So he was doing things that I would have totally fired a reporter if they would have accepted such a thing. He was just made, as I say, he made friends all over the world. He was just brilliant that way.
Last question, I think, right here.
Okay, how observant was he in Judaism, and how much anti-Semitism did he experience, in the community, or when he was dealing with other owners and players?
Right.
I'll take that because I've been talking because I live in the Chicago area, and Abe being from Chicago and being this kind of Jewish sports guy who's maybe underappreciated, we've been doing this great synagogue tour to where we've been talking to synagogues, and they've just been loving the story. And so they've asked that question quite a bit. And his family was observant Jews. He was on the road 11 out of 12 months. So there was a limit to how much he could observe his religion, but he's always very proud of being Jewish, and talked about it a lot. And yes, he was a victim of anti-Semitism too. There was one news clip we found in which, this is in the 1960s, if you can believe it, but it's talking about the Globetrotters in Texas, and this Texas newspaper says, well, Globetrotters dropped the ball twice during the Magic Circle, and old Massa Abe is going to cut their ration of chitlins and bagels.
Yeah, there was another newspaper article about the Globetrotters that said, we hear from Mr. Saperstein that the team took out $5,000 in revenue from that series they played here, and that news is coming from somebody who knows how to count money. So you get the not so subtle
from a tribe who knows how to handle money.
Yeah.
So there was this kind of just baked in racism and anti-Semitism to a lot of what they did, and again, Abe thought he was going to defeat that just by being friendly and showing how stupid it was.
Mark and Matthew, thank you so much for doing this. Congratulations on this great research, great book, and thank you all for being here.